everyone. Welcome to another live stream on the History by podcast. And today, Dr. Robert and Price is joining us, and we're going to be talking about Marcion, the Sinope, Simon Magus, and Paul. So, Bob, once again, thank you for joining me.
Oh, it's my pleasure. Thanks for inviting me.
Thank you for joining me. And before we get to the rest of the topic, can you remind the audience who Simon Magus is?
Yeah, he's depicted in the book of Acts and other second century Christian works as the opponent of Simon Peter. And in the book of Acts, I think it's been slightly changed already to where we have an implied magic or miracle duel between Simon Magus and Philip the evangelist, one of the deacons, so-called, appointed very previously in Acts, just a chapter or so before. And it says that Simon had wowed all the Samaritans with his magic, which really just means his miracles. I mean, that's kind of well known in anthropology, but it's already true even in the Gospels, where Jesus is doing miracles, but the skeptics say, he's just doing magic. He's in league with Beelzebub and so forth. Yeah, that's common. So when it says Simon was doing miracles to wow the rubes, what they're really saying, when they say he was doing magic, what he would have said was he was doing miracles. Now, I think it says, well, that when Philip came along, everybody was a Simonian because his miracles had impressed them. But he preaches the gospel of Jesus, and everybody, including Simon himself, lines up for baptism to become Christians. Now, how would he have done that? How would he have? I mean, if the first guy won their allegiance by miracles, supposedly, I'm not talking about the real world, what may actually have happened, but in terms of a story, it certainly seems that it must have originally shown Simon being shown his place and knocked off his pedestal by a superior show of miracles by Philip. Well, in our present version of it, Philip, though he converts everybody and baptizes them, he is unable to confer the Holy Spirit. Now, what's going on there? Well, obviously, that's another alteration of the story because it fits the Lucan agenda, saying, well, Christianity stems from Jerusalem, as Jesus says it will in Luke 24. And it has to be done by or under the direct supervision of the 12, the original apostles. So Philip wasn't one of them. He was one of the 7. So, I guess he couldn't really dispense the Holy Spirit. And so they had to send for a couple of the actual college of the 12 apostles. And Peter and John come and they lay hands on the converts, and wow, suddenly they all receive the Spirit. And I think it's implied that they all speak in tongues, which is what usually happens in the book of Acts when people receive the Holy Spirit. And because something overt and evident has happened, because it says Simon, seeing this, we must have seen something. He said, he goes to Peter and says, I do miracles too, but I don't know how to bring this about. I'd be glad to pay you to teach me how to do this. And Peter says, what? You think you can buy your way into this thing? Well, I'm telling you right now, you have no role in this ministry. And God will punish you for thinking you could buy your way in. No, please ask him not to. Well, this gave rise to the term simony when you're trying to buy an ecclesiastical office. Well, F.C. Bauer saw correctly, I think, that the original point of the story was that Simon is supposed to be Paul. and that this is another version of the account of Galatians, where Paul says, I approached the original pillars, disciples in Jerusalem to see, what they thought of my gospel preaching. I hoped they would go along with it and not be rivals. And in fact, they said, yeah, you're doing okay. Keep up the good work. You've got our imprimatur, but with one proviso. Since you're making converts hand over fist among all those heathens up there, how about if you send tribute to us, the mother church? Because, we made the mistake of having a socialistic regime here and we're running low on funds. And Paul said, hey, I was already thinking of doing that. No problem. Well, wait a second, isn't that kind of buying apostolic recognition? And so Bauer actually got the idea from his student, Gustav Volkmar. And Bauer said, yeah, you are right. Surely that's what's going on here. Well, then one other change I mentioned, originally, it must not have been Philip. It must have been Peter who beat Simon Magus in a miracle contest and then laid hands on them. Luke has changed that just to make clear that it has to be an apostle from Jerusalem, not some junior not some apprentice like Philip. But originally, it must have been the way it actually is in several other second century accounts, like the Acts of Peter, the Clementine homilies, and so on, where they retell the story of the miracle contest, though they place it in Rome, but it's the same basic idea. This time it is explicitly Peter versus Simon Magus, and it turns out that Simon is oddly similar to Paul in his preaching. He says, you don't have to keep the Torah commandments anymore. I know, because Jesus appeared to me in a vision and told me. And furthermore, you don't have to keep the Torah because it wasn't really given by God. It was the angels who cooked this up to really make people ignorantly worship them. I mean, they're keeping the laws that the angels came up with. God had nothing to do with it. Well, isn't that what the epistle to the Galatians says? If it were God, period, who handed the law to Moses, why would they, to give to Israel, why would he bother with Moses? You only have a mediator dealing with two groups who are opposed and need reconciliation. Well, the fact that it was Moses implies that just as the Israelites were a group, a faction, so were the creators of the Torah, who therefore must have been angels. Colossians speaks of this as the worship of angels by those who demand observance of Sabbaths and kosher laws. In other words, you think you're worshiping God, but you're not, because he didn't give those commandments. The angels did. So you, poor sucker, are actually worshiping them. So it all kind of fits together, it seems to me, that Simon Magus and Paul are supposed to be the same guy. But again, it's been somewhat rewritten because the emerging Catholic Church, who embraced the Jewish tradition, monotheism, still got to keep some of those laws. They did come from Jesus' father. They said that, well, Paul is very... this guy is very influential. We've got to try to co-opt him. And so what they did was to split him into two characters. One, a good Catholicized Christian apostle who quotes the Old Testament and all that stuff. And let's call him Paul. But the historical Paul, Simon Magus, who are his fans? Who's guilty by association? The Marcionites and the Gnostics. In fact, they're the first actual Paulinists we know of. And so we don't want to, we want to co-opt followers. But we want the bad baggage. And so let's split them into two characters, something that's not that uncommon in mythology and so forth. And so it's interesting that second century heretics, Gnostics, etc., said, hey, our teaching goes back to Paul. Irenaeus, another Catholic author, said, oh no, they were originated by Simon Magus. How'd they get such different views? Well, they're not different views because Simon Magus and Paul were the same guy. It's a way of exorcising Paul / Simon by scapegoating the part of him, the Mr. Hyde part that you don't like as a Catholic Christian. And so that was somebody else. I know it's complex, but I think it really does make sense, especially because in the pseudo-Clementine narratives, when Peter is debating Simon, the argument is just like what we see in Galatians. Hey, the original disciples hung around with Jesus. They got it from the horse's mouth, right? And Paul says, I didn't get my teaching from any human source. Christ appeared to me in a vision. And the other apostles said, well, yeah, that's just the problem. How would you know if that's veridical? You might have just been having some kind of weird nightmare. We, however, hung around with this guy. We know what he said. And do you have to keep the Torah? Peter and the others said, darn right you do. And Paul and Simon here, Paul as Simon, says, no, you don't. The angels promulgated that, not God. It sure sounds like what you have in Galatians. That's been laundered for the book of Acts, which required a good bit of retooling, but there's certainly enough fingerprints to make clear to me, as with the great F.C. Bauer and Hermann Dettering and various others, to say, yeah, Simon is the original. Paul is a kind of laundered, Catholicized version, a kind of half Jewish, half Christian apostle. As I'm going way too far into this, but yeah, I think that Bauer was right. Simon Magus was the historical Paul. Paul was a later nickname in all probability. And so you're really dealing with Catholicism, Catholic Christianity, as a kind of a derivative version, just like Marcion said, syncretistically combining Christianity and Judaism, when in fact the original Christian teaching was, hey, Judaism is fine for Jews. We don't want to co-opt it. We don't want to steal it. Fine, let them go with that and their scriptures. We got something new that goes back to Jesus. And our guy, Simon or Paul, is the one who got it right. That's what Jesus wanted. But the 12, as Mark's gospel makes very clear, were a bunch of thick-headed buffoons who couldn't understand anything he said. Isn't it strange that the holy apostles, so revered in churches today, are denigrated and satirized without exception in Mark's gospel? Maybe the Mark has something to do with Marcion. It's just another version of the same name. And they tried to co-opt that. Again, Marcionism was selling like hotcakes. And so they said, well, if you can't beat them and you don't want to join them, why not try to co-opt them? And so they made certain alterations to the Gospels to bring them, and the epistles, to bring them in line with Catholicism. And it's not that tough to delineate what they added. Sorry about this. You got to
Oh no, it's fine.
audience by stopping up the spew here.
What do you make of the idea that somehow the seven Magus it is another version of Marcion?
Well, that quite possible because there's a lot of similarity in their ideas. But I kind of think I go with Stefan Huller's view that when I think Irenaeus and others said that Marcion was actually a disciple of Simon via Serdo, who was guru of Marcion, because we're told that Marcos the magician, which would mean Mark the miracle worker, was a disciple of Simon. And Huller said, "I bet that's Marcion." And in fact, there is a similarity because Marcion says that the Torah was given by the God of this world, not the Father of Jesus. And Simon Magus is on record as saying the angels gave the law, not God. And the one is practically just a slight variant of the other. Both of them were ascetics, apparently. And in The Amazing Colossal Apostle, I suggest that Marcion is already a kind of domesticating of Simonianism, that it's strict, but not as strict as we have reason to believe Simonianism was. It was more drastically ascetic, but that, yeah, it's just a further development of Simonianism, which kind of would mean that Marcion, in the epistolary texts attributed to Paul, that Marcion didn't actually write, as he may well have. There are clues that he wrote Galatians and Ephesians, or Laodiceans, as he would have called the latter, let's see, that I forget the punchline of that. I'm such a big mouth. That other Marcionites, Gnostics, and later Catholics started adding their own epistles into it. But that there's good enough reason to believe that all of that stuff started in a Simonian Marcionite tradition. That's one reason why, even if you think that's the origin, the rock from which they were hewn, you still have a problem with each of the epistles, since they all appear to be patchwork quilts containing material by various authors, sometimes one disagreeing with another in the same epistle. Or, as you've suggested, they may be unitary in result, but representing the opinions of different authors who got together and shared the writing of individual epistles. That could be so, but my guess is that given this, that Marcion must have understood Paul, to his guru, to be Simon Magus. And but I admit it's very speculative. There's no way to prove such a thing, but that just strikes me as the most compelling way to put the tiles together in the mosaic. But I don't dogmatize on it. There's just no way to be sure.
So, Laura Knight, thank you for your super chat. Why did the early Catholic Universal Church pursue the bloody business of heresy? What were they truly afraid of with Marcion the heretic?
Well, they had assimilated the Torah and at least scaling it down to the Ten Commandments. I mean, even today, people say, "Well, Christians keep the Ten Commandments. Do you worship on the Sabbath?" I didn't think so. But in principle, they said, "Oh yeah, the Old Testament is just as much authoritative scripture as the New." And they figured if somebody is peddling a kind of Christianity that says, "No, we're better off without that stuff," And in fact, the God who is worshipped there is a bad character. We ought to repudiate him, preferring the loving God of Jesus Christ, his Father. And I said, whoa, Nelly, we agree with monotheism. And we want to be monotheists. So we don't want this. And if God does expect us to keep the Torah, how dare we take the risk of flouting it? Of course, nobody ever said you're entitled to commit adultery and murder and all that stuff that's commanded against. But all the dietary laws and the holy days, if God expects us to be doing that, I don't want to risk offending him by not doing them. And these guys are saying we don't need to do that. Hey, you can take the risk if you want, but not me. And I think that's one big reason. Suppose we are supposed to obey the Old Testament. I don't want the wrath of God if I decide no. I'm going with Marcion or Paul or whatever. So I suspect that's the big thing.
How much of Simon Magus's teachings do you think Marcion retained, and what do you see Marcion changing?
Well, the idea of who gave the law, both of them are saying that it was not God, the one God. Marcion says it was the creator, but not the ultimate God. And Simon said it was the angels, which kind of amounts to the same thing. And a subordinate source that Christians don't have to obey. And in fact, they're being deceived if they think they have to. So there was a slight change there, apparently, if we take Galatians and the Clementine recognitions as historic there. And of course, that's a risk too. But still, you've got the same basic idea. The Torah is not from the Christian God, so don't keep it. And Jesus, both of them believed in a saving death of Jesus, interestingly enough. He died on the cross to redeem the lost and so on. I mean, both of them held that idea. Both of them believed in the existence of a primordial logos. It's the logos, that Greek word in the Gospel of John, but in Simonianism, it's the enoia or epinoia. You find both, the first thought of God. And this, just as Marcion and Orthodox Christians said, the logos entered into our lot and the realm of death and matter. Well, that's what happened in Simonianism, but it had to do with a kind of Gnosticizing soteriology. Helena was the personification of the enoia, and she was tricked by the angels and entered into the world of matter, losing her memory of her true identity and becoming incarnated again and again, with each incarnation a more degrading one than the last. And by the time, and then Simon, who was the great power of God, the Godhead, the standing one, he entering into incarnations, seeking her like the lost sheep. And he finally finds her. And the two of them, both incarnate deities or aspects of God, are going around having meetings and having evangelistic invitations and so on. And in all this, Helena represents the divine spark in all of the Gnostic converts. They're lost in and confused in the midst of matter, but the Savior Simon has come to re-enlighten them and redeem them. Marcion didn't exactly think that, but according to some interpretations or variant teachings in different subsects, there were some of Marcionism, some of them believed that it was part of the divine light that enabled any of the creatures of the creator, the lower God, to be saved at all, which is implicitly Marcionite. So I see just a kind of natural unfolding of Simonian teaching in the Marcionite movement. Just like everybody else admits that Christian teaching began to change as time went on and new questions required deliberation. And the fact that there were different versions of these things and that their writings were suppressed automatically means you're going to have confusion among the sources. But still, I think you can find consistent threads.
How did Marcion look at Paul?
Well, as the only correct apostle that understood Jesus, because Marcion and Simon both pointed back to Jesus. Irenaeus, I believe it is, says that Simon preached that he had been crucified, though he didn't really suffer. It only appeared that way. In Judea in a previous generation, which calls to mind Simon of Cyrene being yanked out of the crowd to carry Jesus' cross. And the Gnostic Basilides, who claimed to be a kind of grand disciple of Peter, he said that, yeah, it was Simon who was crucified, and that Mark is even telling us that, because it says Simon bore the cross of Jesus, but Simon is the last name mentioned before you get to the sentence, they came to the place of the skull, and there they crucified him. Him who? Well, the last proper name before that is not Jesus, but Simon. And did this just by a clever, twisted reading give rise to the idea that someone was crucified in Jesus' place? Or is that the original point of it? It's not indefensible. And there were a lot of weird, to us, retellings of the crucifixion, like in the Gospel of Peter. Jesus on the cross, though he seems not to be suffering again, says, my power, why have you left me? That sounds like some kind of Gnostic separationism. There were different views of this, but apparently one of them was that of Simon Magus, who said, that was me on the cross. And so Marcion would have believed that Jesus, the Son of the compassionate God, was the one who died, quote unquote, to redeem humanity, at least those who would accept the adoption of the loving Father of Jesus. So, and then you've got, I think, another reference to Simon Magus as Elymas, Bar Jesus, in the book of Acts, and the son of Jesus. What the heck? Why is that even it? Oh, a lot of guys named Jesus. Yeah, but why would you point that out with this guy who seems to be a clone of Simon Magus? Doesn't that mean something like the next version of Jesus, the reincarnation of Jesus? I don't know. I admit that. This is speculative, but I kind of figure where there's smoke, there's fire. If this were as simple as conservatives want to make it, why are all these weird little clues to something in there? You can't just say, well, I don't really know what to make of them, so let's just pretend they're not there. No, you're the alternative may be speculation, and you can't bank on that, but you can't just ignore this weird clashing evidence. You got to at least speculate, and that's what I'm doing.
Was Marcion aware that Simon Magus was Paul? Since he already had a collection of epistles attributed to Paul, that doesn't seem to identify him as Simon Magus. So has Simon Magus already been balkanized into two separate characters, previous and during Marcion's day?
Yeah, very likely so, and I think so. And just like the epistles have undergone a Catholicizing redaction after Marcion initially published them, part of that redaction may have been using the name Paul because that was the way to distinguish them from the original author, Simon and Marcion himself, and who knows who else. I think some Gnostic, out and out Gnostic, a Valentinian perhaps, authored Colossians, though it would have been a kind of Gnosticizing version of Laodiceans / Ephesians that Marcion wrote. But of course, there's been funny business there because Ephesians doesn't even have a recipient listed, and various manuscripts supply Ephesus and so on. So you can tell there was tinkering with these things, and so that they may have been either anonymous, and that might be the way that Marcion originally published them. Keep in mind, the Marcionite prologues are later, and it's conceivable the authorial ascriptions are later. I wouldn't be surprised. I don't think we have any true Marcionite copies. We just have references by heresiologists, and not as many as with the Gospels. But we don't really know exactly what they would have looked like. I bet Jason Badune or Marcus Vincent or one of these guys that were loads smarter than me. And I'm 71. I don't even have time to catch up. These guys would be able to answer that better than me. But it's an excellent question. But I don't think it is powerful enough to make us reject Simonian or Marcionite authorship. Or they may have, if they wanted to circulate them to a wider readership, and Paul had already been differentiated, they may have been trying to co-opt the Catholics that way.
We got a super chat question from Jaxie Wild, Jax Can. Silly question for Dr. Bob. If Jor-El is God, Kal-El is the son, and Lex is the devil, who are the Kents? Who is the Brainiac? Is the bottled city Eden?
I take Superman mythology quite seriously. I think all those comparisons are very good. The Kents would be Mary and Joseph. They adopted baby Kal-El, but pretended that he was their son so they could keep him. They unofficially adopted him. And Brainiac might be considered the demiurge because of the big thing with Brainiac is the shrink ray. Remember, he was going around shrinking and taking cities from various inhabited worlds to put in his collection. And Kandor, the bottled city, was one of them that Superman rescued from Brainiac's ship. And that kind of reminds me of the activity of the demiurge, who is creating his own world. And that's kind of what Brainiac is doing by putting a composite mini world together from these various cities from outer space. And who else was there in there? Was there one I'm missing? Luther, the Kents, Kal-El. Oh, Bottle City. Yeah, the Bottle City would be basically a kind of synecdoche for the mud pie creation of the demiurge, whereas Krypton itself would have been analogous to the pleroma. So I think it all kind of matches. I mean, this is Siegel and Schuster who created Superman, but when you get to Jack Kirby, this guy knew his mystical Judaism. And in the nifty Fantastic Four movie in the theaters now is based on Kirby's work in the Fantastic Four comics, and he said that he came up with Galactus because Stan Lee challenged him to write and draw a story in which the Fantastic Four meet God, and so that's who Galactus is supposed to be. And the Silver Surfer is like a Marcionite Christ. He comes as the servant, and in some forms of Marcionism, he comes as the servant of the demiurge, but then he sympathizes with the poor creatures of the demiurge and turns against the world creator and pays for it, but saves the human race. I don't think it's a coincidence that that's quite a bit like one form of Marcionism. And then don't get me started on the New Gods series that Kirby did, where there's this character called Metron who goes throughout the universe on the what's it called? The Mobius chair. And you know what the Mobius strip is, right? An eternal loop of one-sided dimensionality and stuff. Whoever sits on the Mobius chair hooks into a depository of all knowledge. And you're dealing with the throne chariot of God from the Merkabah mystics there. And to say nothing of the Norse mythology that the Kirby and Lee put to good use. There's a lot of fascinating religious lore in comic books. Not all of them, but a lot of them.
There are different depictions of Galactus now that you brought him up. Which depiction have you seen as your favorite one?
The only one I really remember, because I haven't followed it consistently. I was really reading it in the 60s and early 70s, and I've seen a few bits here and there. It's the one that is very well represented in this movie. Is a humanoid giant in armor with this headdress that's a huge helmet with these antennae or something coming out of it. If they've done them differently, I'm not even familiar with that. But a brilliant invention.
Yeah, because sometimes he can get as big as a planet.
Well, yeah, I guess so, right.
Because let me find it. Let me try to see if I can pull up a good picture from the 2025 depiction of him real quick. Let me see.
Yeah, I love that movie. I wasn't sure if I would, but I did.
Yeah, somebody took this picture from the theater.
Yeah, that's him. Yeah, that is so great.
Yeah.
Wow.
But there is one image I found online. I'll show it to you. I don't know who created this image. You see that? Where he's so big he can reach the orbit of Mars and Earth.
Oh yeah, I've never seen him portrayed that way. Mighty impressive. Wow. Jeez. Boy, oh boy. Yeah, no wonder he'd need to keep eating planets. They're just like baseballs in size to him. Boy. Yeah, great stuff.
I think that somebody, I heard that somebody created that image, possibly of AI, but I'm not positive.
Hmm.
I don't know. But it looks
Yeah,
like
it's not
somebody
in me.
took like a photo of like, it could be a compilation of like a artwork of how Earth looks like, or a picture of,
Hmm.
or even a real photo of Earth and a real photo of Mars. It kind of like
Hmm.
squeezed in there with Photoshop or something like that. I'm not
Hmm.
sure.
Hmm. In
But
the
yeah, if
original.
somebody were to do a movie with this version of Galactus, that'd be uh that'd be a sight to see.
Oh yeah, yeah,
Like
boy. In the second,
how would the Fantastic Four beat that thing that big?
yeah, the only way. Well, in the comics, they get the Watcher to intervene, and he's a giant compared to Earthlings, but nowhere near that big. And somehow, I think he persuades Galactus to let him go. But in another version, the Human Torch goes into the negative zone and retrieves this thing called the Ultimate Nullifier, which is sort of a Deus ex machina weapon that somehow defeats him. Um, I thought this was pretty good though when they sucked him into a black hole and it'll take
Mm.
him forever to get back or whatever the solution was.
Yeah, I need to see that movie because I actually haven't seen it yet. I need to
Oh
see it.
yeah, you'll enjoy it.
Um, but back to Simon Magus.
Mm.
So you would say it would be fair to say that by the time that Marcion's New Testament came out, that Simon Magus and Paul have already been split up into two characters.
I think so.
Was there a point in your view that Simon Magus was already referred to as Paul when they were still the same character, like a title, before they were balkanized, or no?
I think possibly Dettering said that Paul should be understood as a kind of a title. I forget exactly why now. It's been so long since I read that, but I think maybe he said that because in Acts they say Saul, who was also Paul. Um, it's conceivable that he did have both names by different audiences. Or, of course, like what you're pursuing these days, could that be a conflation of two different guys rather than one split into two, as I'm suggesting? Oh, yeah.
Yeah, because that's sort of where I'm at, where they they conflated three different
Mm,
individuals. Two of them out of the three of them were authors.
mm,
The second one that actually wrote material, the second letter writer, was collaborating with co-authors, and that's how they got involved in the corpus. Because
mm, mm-hmm,
it's interesting that Clement never names Timothy, Silas, Sophanes, and Tertius as if
mm,
they weren't part of the narrative yet.
mm, mm,
Um,
mm.
Solar and I thank you for your super chat. Are pantheists atheists where nature is God?
That came up with Spinoza because he was so controversial because he was a pantheist. And some people said, this guy is an atheist. Others said, oh, no, this man is God intoxicated because he sees God in everything, any direction he turns. Because he's saying that everything is a face of the divine nature, unlike monism, as in Advaita Hinduism, which says everything is a mask of Brahman. No, everything as is, Spinoza said, is a face of God, and God is the divine nature that they all share in common. But there is no leftover personhood of a God. This is it. This is like there's uh, the qualified non-dualist school of Vedanta, and Hinduism said that they were panentheists, and they said that everything is in God and God is in everything. The world is the body of God and God is the soul of the world. That meant that even though you and I are part of God, we still need to worship God as a person distinct from ourselves, because it's like the head and the body. But the monists and pantheists like Spinoza said, no. There's no leftover person. This is what you see is it. You just have to open your eyes and see what you're really looking at. So there was no personal deity. And those who called him an atheist, I guess, would have agreed with Francis Schaeffer, fundamentalist apologist. I always liked the way he described pantheism as really pan-everythingism. Where does God fit in? I mean, what does calling it God add to the description of it? And it just means you're worshiping everything, right? And interesting point. So some people said Spinoza was an atheist, and therefore, by extension, some would say today, if you're a so-called pantheist, you're really an atheist. You're denying there's anything answering to a being called God. Whereas others would say, oh, no. By saying God is a separate entity, you are disenchanting the world. You're sucking the sacredness right out of it. So it's really interesting, the warring implications. Just like all these New Testament questions, it's hard to see how they can ever be resolved, but the idea of juggling all of them and balancing them off against each other is itself fascinating, and I would say edifying.
Do you see any evidence of a Pauline corpus pre-existing Marcion? Do you see even canonical letters being written in the 90s AD, or do you think otherwise?
Well, that's not too late for Marcion. Um, they seem to be on the Dutch radical reading, and Marcus Vincent and all these new guys like David Litwa. They seem to be late enough, no matter who wrote them, that Marcion could have been the writer, but that doesn't mean he was. But they're unless you're somebody like Walter Schmidholz that says, well, they do sound like certain second century phenomena, like aspects of Gnosticism. But since we know the letters are authentically early, I guess that just means we got to redate Gnosticism. That's not implausible, but I don't buy it. I tend to think that I go with Ernst Troeltsch with the principle of historical interconnection. You kind of have to look at what else was going on when and see where something fits in. And we know, I mean, all the examples of similarity between Gnosticism and like First Corinthians in Schmidholz's books, they all are identified as Gnostic by reference to the Cainites and the Ophites and all these people that are known to have flourished in the second century. That doesn't prove First Corinthians was, but it does sort of imply it. I mean, it's got to be more probable that that's nearer the date of writing. But that could have meant Marcion, that a lot of these things were in the air. Marcus Vincent and others say that Paul and, or I should say, I'm sorry, Marcion, Basilides, Valentinus, and all these guys had schools in Rome, and probably many students in common. So it wouldn't be that odd for this one to pick up something from that one, and that so it's Gnostic, no matter which Gnostic source you think it fits best with.
Fish and Ty, thank you for your super chat. How popular was the thought Yahweh is not the God of the New Testament?
Well, we're told of certain contemporaries of Marcion who also believed that, Serdo and others. And Gnostics, of course, did, because they said that Yahweh Sabaoth, Lord of hosts, was Ialdabaoth, the kind of garbling of the name, who was the creator demiurge and arrogant and ignorant of a higher God. And this is the kind of thing that led a lot of scholars to say, well, Marcionism is a kind of Gnosticism, though Harnack said, well, no, they're not quite the same. There's no real secret doctrine in Marcionism. It was all out in front, whereas you had to kind of betray your oath to let it, if you were a Gnostic, to even let anybody else know what you believed. But if Marcion wasn't a Gnostic, but on my reading, of course, he must have been, because Simon Magus was. Right? So, he still would be conversant with this idea, because as David Litwa shows in his book on Marcion, which I just got done reading and reviewing, he says that there's a sort of Platonist tradition that distinguishes the good, the form of the good, the ultimate deity, from the demiurge, though the demiurge is like the Logos in the Gospel of John, or wisdom in Proverbs, an aspect, or in Philo, the Logos through whom God created everything else. So it's sort of a second God, as Philo calls him, but really sharing the divine essence, kind of like in the Council of Nicaea. And so you already had a superior and subordinate deity, but Gnostics used it for theodicy purposes, saying that, well, like I think, like Plato said, like who was it? That said, oh brother, this is the best of all possible worlds. Sheesh, I'm blanking out on it. That, in other words, as a finite creation, it can't be everything in every way at the same time. There's going to have to be compromises. Like you're going to have gravity to keep you from sailing off into the atmosphere when you're just trying to walk down to the drugstore. Well, if you want gravity, that means an occasional avalanche, right? It's not going to just turn on and off at your convenience. That is kind of a drawback, but you got to take your choices, and so did the creator. So don't complain about it. You're lucky you have a finite world at all, since you're a finite creature. But the Gnostics said, no, a true, infinite, wise God could have overcome this stuff. Why is there death and evil and so forth? Who would allow that? Well, it must have been some inferior creator, or maybe a committee of inept buffoons. So this was a way of explaining either the limitations or the actual flaws in the creation, to say that the creator was inept or wicked because subordinate to the ultimate God. Had he created it, things wouldn't be this bad. But of course he wouldn't. He's not going to get himself involved in, like in Genesis, God creates Adam from the clay of the ground, like he's making a ventriloquist dummy or something. No. God is absolutely transcendent. He doesn't do stuff like that. He doesn't do anything because he's beyond temporal succession. So it depends on how you want to interpret the subordinate technical inferiority of the demiurge, good or bad. What are you trying to explain? Limitation or flaws? But you already had those options, and Marcionism and Gnosticism simply inherited that tradition and did their own variations on the theme.
Do you think Axe was aware of either Marcion or canonical Paul's version of Paul's letters, or both? And what does it do differently with how it treats the Marcionites with its treatment of Paul and Peter?
Um, I'm really torn on the issue of whether Acts employs the letters, which then must have been prior to it. I used to be real sure that the letters. I'm sorry. I used to figure that Acts narrative um, was written after the epistles, and that certain items were picked up from it, like Paul being rescued by a basket being lowered from the city wall and so on, which is why it's just sort of garbled a bit. But talking with Derek lately and looking at something he wrote that I'm now collaborating with him on, suggesting that the epistles are later than Acts and are making references to the some of the stories in Acts. It makes a lot of sense. So I'm not sure what to think. I still got to do a lot of thinking on it, and but I guess that would come down to, how does the narrative of Acts treat the business with the circumcision party? Is that masking the Marcionite versus Catholic dispute about the origin and the binding force of the Torah commandments? Because it seems to accept the view of Galatians that, if I read it right, is saying, look, the Torah is relevant to Jews. It was given to Jews. Even Jews don't say non-Jews are obliged to keep the dietary laws and such. So the Judaizers are the ones that say, well, if you believe in the Jewish Messiah, Jesus, you're really kind of becoming Jews. You got to keep the whole old covenant. And that Paul is saying, no, they don't, because this is not part of their tradition. You're making it more difficult for them to believe in Jesus by putting these false stumbling blocks in their way. We Jews grew up in this stuff. It's no big deal to us to keep the Sabbath and not eat a ham sandwich and all that. But you're asking these Gentiles to jump through unnecessary hoops. Just let them forget that and just stick with the moral laws. That's no different. So it seems like Acts is aware of that. But Marcion is, and the epistles seem to be saying, sometimes there's reference to that problem, but they seem to be saying, like in Colossians, forget the law was given by angels, and all of that is over. That's a different rationale. And I'm not sure you pick that up in Acts. So how would that bear on the priority?
Hey, Liron.
Hi.
Hey, how you
One of my
doing?
other co-hosts.
I'm quite good. I got something I want to ask. I want to run by you because I
Can-
thought it's a cool idea. Yeah.
Yeah.
Me. Well,
Before we get to that, Liron, let me
Ooh.
get one more thing in here. And there's also a super chat I need to deal with in a minute. So Bob, to respond to what you said, yeah, I kind of already am there that there was Acts came before Paul's letters, but not the full scale Acts, not the whole thing, because as I've shown in what Jerome says, he seems to think that a version of Acts was written by Epaphroditus.
Fascinating.
Remember, I said that. He said that he traces a tradition to Epaphroditus. That and we went. That's where he talks about Sola Viscala being after 70 AD.
Yeah. Right.
So I tend to think Epaphroditus wrote what can be called the wheat document of Acts before the epistles were actually written. And I think that might be more than enough to really get a proto-Acts, even though I don't want to call it that, because it makes it sound hypothetical. I don't think it is hypothetical, because Jerome's attesting to a tradition of Acts being earlier. So that's what I think is going on. And that because what Derek is talking about with the idea of Paul's letters new Acts, this is what Nina Livesey pushed in her book, Reassessing Apostolic Authorship, because she thinks that the epistles are building off of Acts, because you have to have Paul as an important character already before you get to the epistles. But I remember asking Nina this question. Did Acts come before Marcion's version of Paul, though? Because she goes with the Marcionite New Testament being earlier than the canonical New Testament. But Marcion doesn't include Acts. You see my point? So you kind of have the Acts paradox. Does canonical Paul knowing Acts mean that Marcion's Paul knew Acts?
Yeah.
And I think, but now I already think, my view, I think that Marcion's abridging canonical Paul, not the other way around. But I think that Jerome is giving the answer. That Epaphroditus wrote the original Acts, meaning that Acts was originally written by a different author other than Lucan, the author of Luke Acts. So that's what I think happened. And that would have been in the 90s AD, of course, when that happened. I think because Epaphroditus was executed in 95 AD during the Domitianic Purge. So it had to be written by then. Because Clement thinks that the original Paul wrote only one letter. And so you go from one letter. It's not that he wrote only one letter. That's the wrong way of putting it. He attests to only one letter. Not that doesn't mean he only wrote one letter, but he only attests to a letter. Now, so you go from attested to one letter to 13 letters and then 10 letters, or if it's the other way around, 1 letter, 10 letters, 13 letters, depending on how you look at it. But there's obviously a large epistolary expansion. Because
with Ignatius.
Right, exactly. The short recension, middle recension, long recension. I know that there are some that are holding out for the middle recension. I was doing a live stream earlier today with Stephen Boyce, who defends the middle recension. I get it, but he also, I believe, he admitted that the short recension is the earliest attested. Now, what's fascinating to me is the church fathers never claimed that Ignatius was abridged, not to my knowledge. They're all so certain that Marcion abridged Luke, and I do take the view that Marcion abridged Luke, but none of them ever claimed that, to my knowledge, that Ignatius got abridged, which is interesting. Ignatius is treated differently. And so, yeah, from him, he definitely goes from smaller to bigger over time. And I think I can see where one can be more certain of that direction with Ignatius. I can get it there, especially since the church fathers don't seem to have a problem with it either. And I'm not saying just because a church father says it's true, I know that church fathers can screw up and sometimes even contradict themselves, like Eusebius can. But it makes it stronger when you see that not even the church fathers are claiming that Ignatius got abridged.
Yeah.
There's a lot of a lot of scholars. Go ahead. No, you go ahead.
Yeah, you can, as they say, like an argument from silence doesn't exactly prove anything, but sometimes it's a pregnant silence. You think, wait a minute, how would they not deal with this? And sort of an important thing.
Yeah, and let me see. And just to really make this point really clear, I want to remind everybody what Jerome said. And there's a couple people that I've had comment on previous videos lying and claiming that this is not what Jerome says. I'm like, no, I'm afraid this is exactly what Jerome says. Get over it. Now, here it is. Jerome on famous men. Paul, formerly called Saul, an apostle outside the number of the 12 apostles, was of the tribe of Benjamin and of the town of Goodacre in Judea. When this was taken by the Romans, he removed with his parents to Tarsus in Cilicia, sent by them to Jerusalem to study law. He was educated by Gamaliel, a most learned man whom Luke mentions. Now, in the second part, this is what he says. And this is Jerome on the commentary of Philemon. Epaphras, my fellow prisoner in Christ Jesus, greets you. Okay, I'm reading from a quote of Philemon. Let me just start where he's really starting. We have received the following story about this Epaphras. See, that's where the link with Epaphroditus is coming in. Paul's fellow prisoner. They say that the apostle Paul's parents were from the region of Goodacre in Judea, in that when the whole province was laid waste, I think that's the key phrase right there, by the hands of the Romans, and the Jews were dispersed into the world. Tell me with a straight face that's before the war in 70 AD. They were moved to the city of Tarsus in Cilicia as a young man. He followed the condition of his parents, and thus what he testifies about himself can be confirmed. Are they Hebrews? So am I. Are they Israelites? So am I. Are they Abraham's seed? So am I. And again, elsewhere he says, Hebrew
So am
of
I.
Hebrew. Yeah. And the other things that indicate that he was a Jew more than a man of Tarsus. But if this is so, we can conjecture that Epaphras too was arrested at that time when Paul was taken, and that having been found with his own parents in Colossae, a city of Asia, he later received the word about Christ. This is why it is written to the Colossians, as we said above. Epaphras, who is one of you, a slave of Christ, greets you, being always earnest over you in his prayers. Okay, so the obvious question to ask is, in my view, who was the Gamaliel that taught Paul after AD 70? It surely can't be the famous Gamaliel the sage. Well, if you look up the list of the Sanhedrin, the Nasi of the Sanhedrin, one of them after 70 AD was Gamaliel II. Nasi's basically equivalent to president or something like that.
That's the new word for president, but
right. Anyway, yeah, thank you for confirming that, Leron. So, Gamaliel II. That's it. It was Gamaliel II then that was the teacher of Paul, or Saul of Goodacre claiming to be Paul.
Or perhaps the hitherto unknown Gamaliel Schwartz, a local student of the Torah.
Yeah, I don't think Saul of Goodacre is literally the original Paul. The Paul that I think Clement's talking about is before 70 AD. But this Saul, who is living after the Jews were dispersed across the world, which is
for the second time.
Yeah, wouldn't that fit the Bar Kokhba era best?
I'll be I have wondered that, Bob, although I think that considering it's having Gamaliel teach him, I think it's the second one.
Yeah.
I mean, let me correct myself. I didn't say that right. Gamaliel II is late first century. So, and before anybody calls this crazy, because there's an idiot in the live chat that's doing this. I've had Nina Lipsy on the channel, Marcus Vincent on the channel.
Why are you
Saying
wasting
this.
your time with a bum
Yeah.
like me if you can get people like that? Sorry, go ahead.
You're not a bum. Yeah, it's just
We love you.
Right. Yeah. What was the wrath of God in 1 Thessalonians 2:13-16 about then? Tell me what the wrath was before 70 AD, unless you want me to believe 1 Thessalonians was written in 500 BC by Paul, talking about the destruction of the first temple.
Oh,
I'm making a joke.
Yeah. I mean, to be fair, we still mourn the destruction of the first and second temple after 2,000 plus years, so it's not super uncharacteristic. It's just incredibly unlikely.
Right. Yeah, I'm not going to say who it was in the chat that was saying that nonsense, but I'm like, well, if you're going to accuse me of being crazy, yeah, I'm not going to be kind back.
Oof.
But anyway, let's move on from that. Solar Knight, thank you for your super chat. Will the moral compass ever supersede religion? What do you think about that?
well, in liberal Christianity, it seems to me it already has. That Schleiermacher said, if you reduce religion to morality, you're really taking the heart out of it. Morality is a necessary but not a sufficient condition for having religion, and you mustn't have religion that does not have morality in it, or you're dealing with Charles Manson or such. But if what we've seen is liberal religion, which in some ways I obviously have sympathy for, they have ditched the idea of revealed knowledge, as I have, and what they've got left is morality, but morality then becomes politics. And you have the pathetic spectacle of people in their clerical robes sucking up to illegal immigrant rapists and child molesters and so on. Have you lost your mind? Oh, they're the oppressed. No, you're the oppressed by reality, buddy. So it once that has ruined institutional Christianity, in my opinion. I can't really even have any sympathy for that. I mean, fundamentalists, I totally disagree with them, or conservative Roman Catholics like my mother-in-law. There's an integrity in their position. I don't accept it, but I kind of respect it. But these people are just making asses of themselves by just going in for utter sentimentality, where their big sacrament is virtue signaling. But that's the big problem. Yeah, I think you got to have more than ethics to have religion, and without the one, the other collapses.
Well, I mean, at that point, it's nothing to do with religion. Those people are just taking whatever is the current political sentiment, the vibes, and they're just latching it onto the religion as an add-on. It's like adding, I don't know,
Let me get to the super chat.
It makes sense what you're saying.
I'm fishing a tie. Thank you for your super chat. Many parts of the epistles are embarrassing to Paul and the early church, and some show dissent. Doesn't this mean they were probably early, not late?
Well, it depends, really. It could be either way, because it could be that there are these things that contradict accepted orthodoxy, but it was canonical, so they couldn't do anything about it. I think there are cases of that, but it also could be that this is the result of redaction by later hands that wanted to make sure their view got in, that it was too late to actually excise older stuff that they no longer believed, but the best they could do was to add something different. So that people would say, oh, well, I had thought Scripture was saying this, but I guess I'm wrong because of this supersedes it. And my favorite example is in Mark 13, this generation will not pass away before all these things have been fulfilled. And so right afterward, immediately he says, nevertheless, no, of that day or time, nobody knows, not even me. Hold on. I think what happened was the original said, oh, yeah, it's right around the corner. This generation will see it. But time passed, nothing happened. And so somebody said, well, I can't just cut this out of the sacred text, but maybe I could add in something. But as to that day and hour, so the anticipated reader will say, what? The current generation? Oh, I'm not worried over nothing. I see the next verse says that nobody really knows. So I guess I just somehow got that wrong the first time. So they're correcting the text. So I think those two things often explain contradictions in the text. And First Corinthians teems with this stuff. Any chapter you read undermines the one before it, like on topic after topic. How do you explain that? What was it like a council of authors playing Can You Top This? I mean, they're so different. How are you going to read this? Oh, wait a minute. Can women speak up in the assembly or can't they? I got to know. Or speaking in tongues good and you ought to do it, or is it the least of the? What's the deal? What am I supposed to think? And I think that's because they just couldn't leave it alone, though they disagreed with it, and they had to add their view, hoping you'd just gravitate to the one you liked.
Valiant threw a question in here earlier.
Ah.
It's addressing me. Jacob, could the first earliest guy you call Paul saw up in Seven Magus, especially Paul as a title? Well, I only suggested that because I don't think the original Paul was a title. I guess it sort of became like that later, in a way. I'm not. I think Seven Magus influenced the canonical picture of Paul, although I'm not so sure that they were originally the same character.
Well, nor am I. I readily admit this is speculative. Yeah.
I think, given that the recognitions name Saul as the attacker of Paul, but it never brings him up again, and it talks about Seven Magus a lot. It doesn't sound like to me that they were originally the same human being. I Fish and I thank you for your super chat. W. Dr. Price, I think he means with Dr. Price. So I think there's something that you said earlier that he agrees with you on, but I don't know what it was.
You're wise, Van Helsing.
But I think that Seven Magus, based on what the recognition says, is a contemporary of Clement's Paul, the original Paul, in the 30s. But that's what it seems like to me, given that the recognitions places Seven Magus when Caiaphas and Gamaliel were around a lot, or in a little bit after, I think. I don't remember. I'll have to double check that. But Saul attacking James is definitely placed when Gamaliel and Caiaphas held their respective positions simultaneously. Meaning that Gamaliel was Nasi of the Sanhedrin and Caiaphas was the high priest. The only time that those two held those positions was from 30 to 36 AD when they were together. And Caiaphas James, I think I'm hearing myself through your.
Oh, please forgive me.
Mm.
Of course, you were hearing yourself. I was listening to y'all.
I thought it was the voice of a god, not a man.
It was the voice of God
Oh.
Christ himself.
Oh no! Now let's not get started. I'm two different people now. Like somebody starting with the letter E. Yeah, let's.
The question that I had for you, though, related to the reason why you had Dr. Price on today, is he has a fascinating argument. And the Clementine recognitions does seem to place Simon Magus in the 30s, the time when you say the first incarnation of Saul Paul happened. And surely the attribution later, say Saul of Giscala, that Jerome is talking about, is some subsequent dude, or some Saul in the 60s, as you point out from Josephus. He's a subsequent dude. If he is a compression of different figures from the first century, let's put it that way, why not Simon Magus is one of them?
No, I already think that Simon Magus is one of them.
Yeah.
But I thought the way you were phrasing your question is the way it came off to me was Clement's Paul and Clement Simon Magus were the same character. That's where I got confused. Unless that was your question.
Well, that could be my question too. I mean, are
right? That's why I said I don't think that's the case.
Right.
But now that what is interesting is the claim that I can't remember the recognition said this, so that's my problem. But Acts definitely seems to suggest that Peter killed Simon Magus, or somehow was involved in causing his death, something like that. And that would kind of remind me of the way Clement says that Paul was killed by rival believers, which Oscar Coleman around 1930, I think. But around that time, he made that same suggestion that Paul was killed by Christians. Because that's how he reads what Clement says, that people with envy and jealousy of Paul what caused his downfall, caused his death.
Right.
I think that's a reference to the Acts of Paul, where husbandly jealousy led to his execution.
Paul died in a lot of ways. He only died twice, as I learned from James Bond.
Well, a lot of Christians today would like to have a hand in stoning him, I think.
To me, the Acts of Paul is conflating Clement, the way Clement talks about Paul's death with the other BS narrative within itself, the Acts of Paul, about Paul's death under Nero. It's like, wait a minute. So you're telling me that Paul died under Nero, guy's head reattached to his neck after the beheading so he can die again later.
Right.
But he also died earlier as the one that was killed by. This is ridiculous. Now he's dying. Now
I figured it out. Paul is a cat and he has 9 lives.
Hey,
well,
there you go.
You were talking about Ignatius earlier, and so there's some cat either who has, by coincidence, the same name Ignatius, who's redacted.
Oh yes, that's just to be specific. That had to do with something I mentioned a couple years ago.
Then I read.
Let me finish. That sure. the Polycarp's Ignatius might not be the same Ignatius that wrote the 3 letters.
So I read these letters
in the early 2nd century, since he was alive after Ignatius died. Same. How do you live after you're dead? That doesn't make any sense.
There's a straight up problem in Polycarp. There's no question. When did Ignatius live? And so are we? And since someone did redact him, I mean, it's a question of what? Look, I read these letters that are ascribed to this guy named Peter. I really don't think these letters were written by the guy Jesus knew. And so, and then I read all the stuff about was this authentic Paul, and scholars, and I'm pretty darn sure that 3rd Corinthians and the Seneca.
Oh, 3rd Corinthians was written by the same. It was written by the same person that wrote the Acts of Paul.
Well, the point is, let's abstract from the examples though that I'm using. What Christians did, their MO was to write in the name of some earlier authority. I think we just have to yield. I mean, it's not accidentally some guy named Peter is writing for Peter, or the epistle ascribed to James, which I grant you does not claim to be written by the brother of the Lord, but has his theology. So there's someone
Yes.
channeling James. There's someone channeling Paul. There's someone in their own mind channeling Peter. There's someone channeling Ignatius. That's what early Christian writers did. And so I think we should be very, very open to who those characters might have been and what their real names, what the secret identity underneath the mask might have been every single time. So when we have multiple names, Saul, Paul, Simon, Magus, we could be looking at three different incarnations of different people who were either later attributed the title Paul or who assumed the title Paul. I think that's very easy to believe when I look at this literature.
And I think that Second Corinthians creates an analogy because of it. Well, not an analogy, but a fictitious story of Paul being shipwrecked 3 times. So a fry shipwreck in Second Corinthians, assuming that the shipwreck in the Adriatic Sea and Acts was part of Epaphroditus' Acts, could be an expansion off of that, while also simultaneously being an expansion of Josephus's metaphor of the whole region going down like it's a ship that is sinking. Let me pull up that verse, because very often I quote it and I forget if he really means Damascus is going down as a sinking ship, or if it's Judea that's going down like a sinking ship.
Maybe it's
I thought I was unlucky that my flight got delayed by like 2 hours. This guy got shipwrecked.
probably
Let me pull up that verse.
The Democratic Party.
Okay, this is what Josephus says. After this calamity had befallen Cestius, many of whom of the most eminent of the Jews swam away from the city, as from a ship when it was going to sink. There it is, right there. Costobaros, therefore, and Saul, who were brethren together with Philip, the son of Jasimus, who was the commander of King Agrippa's forces, ran away from the city and went to Cestius. But then how Antipas, who had been besieged with them in the king's palace, who would not fly away with them, was afterwards slain by the seditious. We shall relate hereafter. However, Cestius sent Saul and his friends at their own desire to Achaia to Nero, to inform him of the great distress they were in, and to lay the blame of their kindling the war upon Florus, as hoping to alleviate his own danger by provoking his indignation against Florus. In the meantime, the people of Damascus, when they were informed of the destruction of the Romans, set about the slaughter of those Jews that were among them. And as they had them already cooped up together in the place of public exercises, which they had done out of the suspicion they had of them, they thought they should meet with no difficulty in the attempt. Yet did they distrust their own wives, which were almost all of them addicted to the Jewish religion, on which account it was that their greatest concern was how they might conceal these things from them. So they came upon the Jews and cut their throats, as being in a narrow place and numbered 10,000, and all of them were unarmed, and this in 1 hour's time, without anybody to disturb them. I believe the Acts of Paul was plagiarizing Josephus right here to create the entire situation of Paul's death under Nero. It was right here. Because I think Saul and his brother Costobarus, or Costobarus, or however the hell you want to pronounce it, it's probably Costobarus. But anyway, Costobarus and Saul were killed together because you can tell that their lives were in danger. They wanted to blame the kindling of the war upon Florus, because you can tell Nero's mad. He's mad that there's war. He didn't want war, but he's got it. This isn't exactly in 66 AD, which is very often the year that Christians claim Paul was killed. But then you got to ask yourself the question: why does the Acts of Paul claim that his head got reattached? Well, the way it claims is he was alive again. So his head got reattached somehow. That's the implication. So and then in the next paragraph, you have Damascus that gets mentioned. Saul fled from Jerusalem, though, Herodium, when the palace got burned down. The king's palace. He didn't flee from Damascus. But I can see that the author of 2 Corinthians, which I think was Saul of Giscala, pretending to be the original Paul, and pretending to be this guy too, misread the passage And for what? Oh, he fled from Damascus. When he really should have said that Paul fled from Jerusalem. Then when you get to canonical Acts corrects 2 Corinthians. It says, oh, Paul fled from Jews, while still claiming he fled from Jews in Damascus. So it doesn't really correct it. Still puts him in the wrong place. Because I think what's happening is the original Paul did flee from King Aretas, because the same person that fled from King Aretas can't be the same human being that fled from Jews in 66 AD and be the same one writing the canonical letters in the 90s. That doesn't make any sense. It can't be both of them. That's ridiculous. And if you got 3 Pauls, you have 3 shipwrecks. Each shipwreck represents each of them, is the way I look at it. It's symbolic, representing the 3 Pauls, because the 3 Pauls were already being conflated in 2 Corinthians and in the other letters before we get canonical Acts. And canonical Acts is trying to harmonize the chronology. That's why it never talks about Paul's death.
What I find most interesting there is the metaphorical shipwreck.
Before you continue, I want to state that I changed my mind on one detail, and that is, the more I think about it, I don't think that Saul was killed in the 90s. I think he died of natural causes in 97 AD instead of being killed, because there doesn't seem to be any martyrdom story about him. And although the Acts of Paul, Bob, you pointed this out earlier, claims that Paul was killed by jealous people, kind of like the way Clement puts it. But the thing about Clement is Clement puts it earlier, whereas the Acts of Paul reverses it. All of a sudden, the jealousy is placed after the beheading. So it's inverted. But before that, there's no evidence that Saul, the letter writer, was actually killed. He didn't die a violent death.
Maybe they just meant his mail went to the dead letter office.
Anyway, sorry for my interruption, Jim. Finish your point.
No, I was just observing that, of course, historians try and, jazz up their writing with metaphors and stuff.
Right.
But here we have a relatively straightforward historical account that sounds credible for other reasons, by the way. The Romans, in the wake of the Jewish war, started, they talk about the wives of the soldiers being all taken with the Jewish religion. When Roman troops they only exceptionally could have their wives. Most ordinary troops didn't bring their wives along. But with their station there for a long time, they developed lives in the local areas and connections with the local areas. One of the reforms the Flavians brought to the Roman army as such was to mix them up, to take men from units and send them to other geographical areas so they wouldn't develop close local ties. And so here we can see kind of an example of that Josephus is giving us of, these guys, their wives, the women folk are all being taken with Judaism, and that's a security issue when you're fighting Jewish rebels. And so there's a touch of reality to what Josephus is saying there that it's hard to miss, but also a touch of poetry, a shipwreck that the Jewish rebellion is taking the Jewish people down with, in effect.
Yes, and I'll go up. You finish?
Paul and Josephus both have shipwrecks in Acts and in their autobiographies, which is really, really quite interesting. I don't know what to make of it. Shipwrecks were common in the Mediterranean back in ancient times, I know. But how many shipwrecks does Paul have?
In Acts, it's 1, and 2 Corinthians, it's 3.
In 2 Corinthians, he has 3 shipwrecks. Now, that's bad luck, even, I would say, for the Mediterranean in the first century. It's just interesting, the metaphor, the shipwreck metaphor.
But what caused me, years ago, I originally thought years ago that Paul did die of natural causes, and the letter writer died of natural causes in the 90s. But I also wondered if he could have been killed by Domitian during the persecution, but there's no evidence of that either. In fact, if you look at the letters, he got out of it because in the pastoral epistles and in Philippians, it's like in the pastoral epistle, 2 Timothy, Saul, I think it's Saul of Scala, is saying, my bonds in Rome was in the past. Well, how could you say that if you think you're about to die? I think Christians really get 2 Timothy wrong. It's not saying he's not saying I'm going to die of a martyrdom soon. He says the opposite. He thanks the household of Onesiphorus. He thanks Onesiphorus for visiting him when he was in the chain. He's saying it in past tense. He's not expecting a violent death. And you kind of get the same picture with Philemon and Philippians, especially, I think he says, I can't remember which one. It's either in Philemon or Philippians where Paul says, I expect to be released soon. Wait a minute. You can't be the guy who got killed by Nero. What is this? I'm going to be released soon? Are you kidding me? So something is wrong with that picture, but I think what might have happened is wasn't Domitian kind of looked at like a second Nero, Jim?
Oh, that was the metaphor.
And right. So
the comparison, for example,
think about what the Acts of Paul does then.
Yeah.
I'm going to get Paul to live longer by making him rise from the dead in 66 AD. And then I'm going to give him the death the first Paul got by placing it after his beheading and going to put it in the 90s. So all of a sudden Paul gets resurrected so he can write the letters in the 90s.
Well, you know, without a head, it really hurts my own letter writing. I reattach the head so I can get back to, letter writing, write most of the letters.
Right. That's what it looks like is going on. We are behind on super chats. I gotta take this one. Jackson.
Wait. Just before we start the super chat, before we start the super chat, I just want to highlight one comment I saw that I found adorable. This wasn't a super chat, but this one wins for me. The New Testament would be much better if Saul became Johannes Gumbeltoy de van Oosterfin Splendens Schiltens Krussel von Frei Dinger Donger Dinger Danger Donger Weimge Gistrufen Knacker Trasser Appelwenger Horowitz.
Who wrote that?
I happen to know a person with that name. Damn, I forgot. Oh no, it's a Knacker. You're not supposed to say it. That's a story in Ireland.
Talk about a Tuvix transporter accident on steroids.
Oh yeah.
DM Morgenstern, thank you for that wonderful comment. I love it.
Anyway, that's how I look at the Acts of Paul. That there's a Tuvix transporter accident going on. You got all this, the beheaded guy and the other guy that got killed by envious people are suddenly the same person.
That's a great episode.
Yeah. Okay, Jackson Wild. Thank you for your super chat. What was that, Leron? What did you say?
Thank you for the super chat.
Yes. What do you think of Paul being
We're getting to them now.
The spotter of lies from the Dead Sea Scrolls and the teacher being James of Ananias as the wicked priest? Well, let me give my thoughts first, which will be quick. Since the Damascus document puts the righteous teacher in the 2nd century BCE, I still think Jason is the righteous teacher, which is what I said on video years ago, because the reverse dating of the Damascus document, based on when it puts the righteous teacher, it gives them the chronology of, I can't remember exactly. I think it was like 410 years after the first temple was destroyed, lines up when Jason became high priest. And he gets into a conflict with Menelaus, which looks like the conflict between between the righteous teacher and the wicked priest. And we got to remember, in the Dead Sea Scrolls, the wicked priest never kills the righteous teacher, actually. He chases him. And the scrolls at one point describes him as having his hands look like the hands of a cat with claws, like a lion's paws or something like that, trying to chase the righteous teacher, but he can never catch him. That's the primary reason why I don't think Eisenman's right. I've had Eisenman on the show. I've enjoyed having him on like 5 times, and at one point, all 4 of us here did a show with him together. But I do disagree with the Dead Sea Scrolls being later. On that one, I'll go with. I think the consensus correctly dated the Dead Sea Scrolls, and I'm not just saying that because I believe the consensus, simply because it is the consensus. No, I'm saying it because I find it convincing.
Yeah, no one could be a greater admirer of Professor Eisenman than me. I think he has tremendous insight in many areas, and I think his understanding of what he really importantly did was to reintroduce the idea of politics into our thinking about different Jewish sects at the time, and I think we owe him a great deal just for that. I agree with his basic analysis of the ideological relationship between certain Christian literature and the sectarian scrolls. That is to say, it's really hard to miss that certain images, in fact, there were images that were thought Pauline until the discovery of the Dead Sea Scrolls. And as we read in the sectarian, oh my gosh, talk about metaphors. That metaphor is right there in the sectarian Dead Sea Scrolls, and we thought its oldest use was Paul. No, I think there are connections between the sectarian scrolls and that community and early Christianity. What those connections are, I'm not certain of, but I think he establishes connections. Now, I have to agree with Jacob, though. What I'm still unconvinced of is that the sectarian documents were 1st century AD. And I think that remains my central problem with Professor Eisenman's total thinking. But I think he has many great insights.
Eisenman said it. I believe it. That settles it. Hallelujah.
Yeah.
I wish there was some oracle like that we could go to that would have all the answers and that we could just
One thing I did know a while back, but I want to reassess it to make sure that I still think that, but I think I still do. Hosea Pesher might be something I could still treat as 1st century, because it claimed that there were no more priests around, which was kind of a strange statement to make before 70 AD. I'm like, what do you mean there are no more priests? That's kind of weird. So I do go with the consensus on the Damascus document and the Habakkuk Pesher, but Hosea Pesher, I kind of wonder, wait a minute. And what do you mean there's no more priests?
And we have found
I like what Woody Allen said in a little essay called "The Scrolls." He said some doubt the dating of the scrolls because of the appearance of the word Oldsmobile in the text.
That was the dead giveaway.
Yeah.
I haven't opened this in a while, but let me see here.
It is not impossible that some of it is 1st century. The key stuff, though, as you point out, where it makes the identification, so the teacher of righteousness being James and Paul being the liar, for example, I'm not sure those date to the 1st.
I think the liar was Menelaus's brother, Lysimachus. Lysimachus was ignoring the Torah and going around and stealing and killing people, stealing from people and killing people. And Lysimachus was when he was caught and killed, which I think also, I'm not positive, this might have happened to the liar in the scrolls, but I don't remember.
Well,
Lysimachus, I'm convinced, is the liar.
We found fragments of sectarian document at Masada. And I think that's pretty revealing right there. And I think that we shouldn't be taken in by Josephus's idea that Essenes were all peace-loving and like Greek philosophers and so forth. No, I think that you did have your militant Essenes, as I think Hippolytus reveals, and I think Eisman makes a really great point in putting the dots together. Apocalypse has to be the genre of our rebels, right? And I think when we line up the ideologies with the politics of the time, I think great insight can be found. So with all due respect and admiration to Professor Eisenman, who I think everyone knows, I have great respect.
Okay, I found the reference.
There.
It is in the commentary on Hosea, or Hosea Pesher Hosea. Let's see. This refers to the last priest who will stretch forth his hand to smite Ephraim. I will go back to my place until they admit guilt and seek my presence when it goes badly. For then they seek me. So I'm like, wait a minute. What do you mean the last priest? And then it keeps going. This means that God will turn his face to from that. Let me reread that. This means that God will turn his face from them, and they did not listen. They, like Adam, broke the covenant. This means that they abandoned God and followed the laws of them and all. It sounds like it kind of reminds me of the book of Jeremiah, where it's like saying, it's because you didn't listen to God, you didn't believe in him hard enough, that y'all lost everything. I'm like, is this...
Although it's written in prophetic terms, you'd say it's retrospective of the last priest having actually come and gone. Like most prophecies, it's a post-event thing.
Right. It seems like it's... and Leron's back again. But yes, it looks like Pesher Hosea. Well, especially if it was being just prophetic, I might have looked past it, but then it said last priest of Ephraim, or it will slay Ephraim, something like that. I'm like, that's weird.
They do have certain outright prophetic stuff, though. I mean, they are expecting the war between the sons of light and the sons of darkness, and
right, but none of those texts claim that none of those texts expect the last priest.
Well, that is an interesting turn of phrase. But it is found in apocalyptic, in a pile of apocalyptic prophecy.
Not the last priest, well. Not that I'm aware of.
I think
maybe I missed something.
I grant you that's a very interesting turn of phrase.
Yeah, the last priest.
Need to get going. I'm afraid I have to elevate my leg because of a hematoma.
Okay. I wanted to ask you something.
Okay, but we need to be quick then. I got a few more super chats we got to go through really fast. Jesus Tales, thank you for your super chat. This is for James Valiant, who asked R.G. Price if Babylon was treated as Jesus and Paul respect Rome. Jeremiah 29:7 shows they did.
Yes.
James, it's for you. It's for you.
Yeah.
To save time, you alone should address this.
Well, I'm not sure what the thrust of the question is. Yeah, I think the comparison is pretty clear.
Well, he quotes it. Jesus says, thank you for this another super chat. But seek the welfare of the city where I have sent you into exile, and pray to the Lord on its behalf, for in its welfare you will find your welfare.
Where is that from? Is it from Jeremiah or the Epistle of Jeremiah?
The book of Jeremiah. Yeah, I think that's what he was quoting. But we'll go to the next one because
sound advice when you've been conquered and you're in a foreign city.
Mm-hmm.
Constellation Pegasus, thank you for your super chat. Mr. Price, I watched the Witch movie you mentioned some time ago. Brilliantly done. However, I don't understand what really happened.
The movie called The Witch.
Yeah, that's what he said.
I found it fascinating. There's a sort of two different endings in it. The son who goes off into the forest and is somehow seduced by the witch, he comes back and he coughs up these golden apples or something, and he is like a martyr. he as he's dying, he has this beatific vision of the love of Christ and so forth. It's very impressive. But then his older sister, who apparently did get involved with a witch as a witch, gets recruited by Satan, who actually appears dressed as sort of a cavalier back in like Puritan times. And she goes into this witch's Sabbath, where the women naked are floating up in the air, as they always claim they did. And she goes into this ecstasy of exaltation because Satan has delivered her from the hard scrabble, severe existence of her puritanical family. And I'm not sure what the point is, but it is really fascinating. How they're both of them were right somehow. And really, I don't know what the director had in mind.
Well, we have 3 more super chats when we out of here. Solar Knight, thank you for your super chat. Rum conquered all of these folks, took all their religious papers, threw them into a scrambler, added a bunch of pagan crap, and republished for Roman propaganda dominion. I think that's for you, Jim.
Well, sometimes I'm tempted to think that that's exactly what happened. I think that there have been there's great scholarship on the relationship between the mystery cults, as they were, I think, probably miscorrecting to call them mystery cults, although there's this mystery to many of them, secret knowledge, but that is, in my view, ideologically connected to Gnosticism. Which I think was an early influential feature on Christianity. Christianity represents a great syncretism of ancient religions, and it represents that smack dab in the golden and silver eras of the Roman Empire. So I think you have to expect there to be to take on all kinds of features of Greco-Roman religion, and so it does.
Okay, we have only 2 more super chats, and I know Bob's got to go, so I want to be really fast here. I'm not taking any more super chats, just so everybody knows. I'm not putting it on the screen. But anyway, Solar Knight, thank you for your super chat. Modern America is becoming the kingdom of heaven.
Well, maybe so. If, like me, you're a Trump fan.
What's the kingdom of heaven?
That's why I don't want to comment on this, because I don't know what Solar Knight means.
Well, for people like Bob, the kingdom of heaven is already here. Look around.
Hallelujah.
I appreciate it. So I thank you for your super chat. Thoughts on James and Jesus being Essenes? Well, I would say they probably were, since the Gospel of the Hebrews, which I think is super early, is talking about Jesus having dietary laws like an Essene in the Dead Sea Scrolls, and so that kind of fits the bill, I think.
Pharisees, Sadducees by name, scribes,
and Jesus Tales, thank you for being a member.
Yeah, they get ripped on. The Essenes don't get ripped on, whereas there's leadership council of 12 is in the Dead Sea Scrolls and so forth. Many much smarter people than me have noted the connections between the Dead Sea Scrolls sectarian community and early Christianity.
There is this great series of articles from, I think, the Journal of Jewish Studies back in the 50s, at least, if not earlier, by Jacob Teicher, Teicher. I hope I'm saying it right, where it's a book's worth. And I went to the trouble years ago of Xeroxing every page of this long series of articles where the guy says that the Dead Sea Scrolls are the writings of the Jerusalem church, and that the early Christians of Jerusalem were the Ebionites and the Essenes. And it's a powerful thing. I would love to see this made available as a book. It should be, but I don't think it has been. And this is way obviously before Eisenman, but it really dovetails with his work.
Absolutely. And obviously the Pauline revolution is what we get in the New Testament. You don't have to worry about traditional Torah, and they'll give you all kinds of Greek philosophy to tell you why. The concepts that Dr. Price was talking about earlier, like demiurge. And it sure sounds like some form of Platonism or Stoicism that you're hearing when you're talking about eternal recurrence and the demiurge and logos. It's Greco-Roman.
This is not super related, but I heard the way Gnostic religions thought of the demiurge and his archons, which are basically demons. I'm like, Hey, wait a moment. This is just AI.
Well, that's not too far from the truth, I think.
No, really, it's like it's purely material. It thinks. It doesn't know anything, but it can. It just has a lot of predictive power, just because of experience or just because of sheer volume of awareness. But it can't think worth a damn. And I'm like, yeah, this is just AI.
Did you ever see the Avengers movie Age of Ultron?
I did.
Whoa, what a nightmare that is. And it's like a prediction of what's happening. Whew.
I'm not nearly as cynical because I realize AI is just mediocre. I mean, like...
Give it time, like about 10 more minutes.
Regurgitating everything. Like, James, you're going to get this. It's like a key.
We get Ultron or we get the Terminator.
Yeah. Well, it's always fun, and it sure has been tonight. Gents, thanks for a great evening.
Yeah, Bob and Jim and Leron, thank you all for joining me.
Bye-bye.
And I'll have the link to purchase the Amazing Colossal Apostle in the description below, everybody.
Thank you.
Right.
Yeah.
Hello viewers, thanks for watching this video from the History Valley YouTube channel. Please don't forget to subscribe and hit the notification bell. And if any of you wish to further support this channel, please consider checking out this channel's Patreon page and becoming a patron. And or donate through PayPal or through Super Chat during your live stream. Thank you.